When my 8-year-old daughter Mia opened the birthday gift that my parents had shipped to our house and froze completely, her small hands trembling as she whispered, "What is this?" in a voice filled with confusion and fear that immediately sent alarm bells ringing through my entire body. I knew that something terrible was about to be revealed that would change our family forever and force me to confront truths I had been avoiding for years. We were sitting in our living room on a sunny Saturday morning in late September, surrounded by colorful wrapping paper and the remnants of what had been a joyful birthday celebration with friends and neighbors who had helped make Mia's special day everything I wanted it to be. When the package from my parents arrived via overnight delivery with a note that said, "Happy birthday to our special granddaughter," written in my mother's careful, precise handwriting that I recognized from years of, formal correspondence that always felt more like business communications than expressions of love or affection. Mia had been so excited to receive a surprise gift from her grandparents who lived across the country and rarely remembered important occasions like birthdays or holidays, dancing around the room with the pure joy that only children can feel as she carefully peeled away the tape and wrapping paper to reveal what she hoped would be something wonderful and thoughtful that showed how much they loved her and cared about her happiness. But when she lifted the lid of the ornate wooden box that had been nestled inside layers of protective packaging and saw what was inside, her face went pale and her entire body went rigid with shock, as if she had seen something that her young mind couldn't process or understand, but that triggered an instinctive fear response that made my heart race with alarm and protective fury. Inside the box was a collection of old photographs yellowed with age, official documents with government seals and foreign writing, personal items that clearly belonged to someone from my family's past, and newspaper clippings that looked like they had been carefully preserved for decades by someone who thought they were important enough to keep but too painful to discuss openly with living family members. What my parents had sent was evidence of a family secret so devastating and disturbing that it would force me to confront truths I had been avoiding for years and make decisions about protecting my daughter that would destroy my relationship with my parents forever. But save Mia from trauma that could have damaged her emotional development for life if I hadn't intervened immediately to protect her from information she was far too young to understand or process in any healthy way. The birthday celebration that morning had been everything I wanted for Mia, filled with laughter, games, and the kind of innocent joy that makes childhood memories that last forever and create the foundation for a happy, secure sense of self that would serve her well throughout her life. We had spent weeks planning this party, decorating the house with streamers and balloons in her favorite colors of purple and silver, creating a magical atmosphere that would make her feel special and celebrated on her 8th birthday. I had invited her closest friends from school and the neighborhood, children who genuinely cared about Mia, and who brought presents that reflected their knowledge of her interests and personality rather than generic gifts that could have been purchased for any child without thought or consideration. The morning had been spent playing party games that I had carefully chosen to ensure every child could participate and feel included. Eating homemade cake that Mia had helped me bake and decorate with elaborate frosting designs that represented her favorite characters and hobbies, and opening gifts while the children laughed and celebrated another year of Mia's life, with the pure enthusiasm that only children can bring to special occasions when they feel safe and loved. Mia had been glowing with happiness as she opened gifts from her friends, exclaiming over each present with genuine gratitude and excitement that showed the kind of appreciation and joy that comes from children who understand the value of friendship and celebration, who have been raised to recognize thoughtfulness and kindness in others. Her friends had given her art supplies that reflected her love of drawing and painting, books from series she had been wanting to read for months, puzzle games that would challenge her developing problem-solving skills, and small toys that represented inside jokes and shared experiences that had developed through months of friendship and playdates. The pile of gifts represented not just material objects, but the love and thoughtfulness of people who truly knew and cared about her as an individual child with specific interests, preferences, and dreams that they wanted to support and encourage through their carefully chosen presents. The party had been winding down when the delivery truck arrived with the unexpected package from my parents, who had not mentioned sending anything despite my email reminders about Mia's birthday approaching, and my subtle hints about how much it would mean to her to receive something from her grandparents who seemed to exist more as distant concepts than as real people in her life. My parents lived in Oregon while we lived in Colorado, a distance that had grown not just geographically, but emotionally over the years as I struggled to maintain a relationship with people who seemed incapable of showing genuine love and support for their granddaughter, or understanding the kind of mother I was trying to be in raising a child who deserved unconditional love and acceptance. They were formal and distant people who had always prioritized appearances and social standing over emotional connection and family warmth, creating a childhood for me that was filled with expectations and criticism, rather than unconditional love and acceptance that builds healthy self-esteem and secure attachment patterns. My memories of childhood were dominated by their constant feedback about my behavior, appearance, and performance in school and social situations, as if my worth as their daughter depended on my ability to reflect well on their parenting and social status, rather than simply being loved for who I was as an individual child with my own personality and needs. When Mia was born, I had hoped that becoming grandparents would soften them and help them develop the kind of loving relationship with her that they had never been able to create with me, that the joy of having a grandchild would awaken emotional capacities that had been dormant during my own childhood, but that might emerge in their golden years. Instead, they seemed to view her as an obligation rather than a joy, remembering her existence only when it was socially necessary, or when they needed to appear to be caring grandparents to their friends and social circle, who expected them to show appropriate interest in their family members. Their gifts, when they remembered to send them, were usually inappropriate for her age or interests. Generic items that could have been purchased for any child without thought or consideration for Mia's personality, preferences, or developmental stage, as if they had asked a store clerk to select something suitable for a child of her age, without providing any information about who she was as an individual person with specific likes and dislikes. This package was different, though, more carefully wrapped than their usual perfunctory presents, with expensive shipping and handling that suggested they had put unusual thought and effort into whatever they had decided to send for her 8th birthday, which made me hopeful that perhaps they had finally made an effort to choose something meaningful that would show Mia how much she meant to them as their granddaughter. Mia's excitement about receiving something special from her grandparents had been heartbreaking to watch, because I knew how desperately she wanted to feel loved and valued by these distant relatives who existed more as concepts than as real people in her life, but who she continued to hope might someday show her the kind of grandparent love that her friends described when they talked about their own grandparents who spoiled them with attention and created magical memories together. She talked about them frequently, asking when we would visit them again or when they might come to see us, creating elaborate fantasies about the relationship she wished she had with grandparents who would spoil her with attention, take her on special outings, teach her family recipes, and create the kind of intergenerational bond that she saw other children enjoying with their grandparents, who were actively involved in their lives. I had been trying for years to manage her expectations and protect her from the disappointment that inevitably came from hoping for more emotional connection than my parents were capable of providing, but I couldn't bring myself to completely destroy her dreams of having loving grandparents who cared about her well-being and happiness enough to make an effort to be present in her life in meaningful ways. When she saw the package with their return address written in my mother's familiar handwriting, her face lit up with hope and anticipation that made me both happy for her excitement and worried about what disappointment might be waiting inside the carefully wrapped box that looked more promising than anything they had ever sent before in terms of size, weight, and apparent thoughtfulness of presentation. As Mia carefully opened the package, taking her time to preserve the wrapping paper because she wanted to save it as a memento of this special delivery from her grandparents, who so rarely acknowledged her existence, I felt a growing sense of unease that I couldn't quite explain or rationalize, but that made me want to stop her from continuing with the unwrapping process. Something about the weight and size of the box, the unusual care that had been taken with the packaging, and the strange formality of the note attached to the outside made me suspect that whatever was inside was not going to be the kind of birthday gift that an 8-year-old should receive from loving grandparents who understood appropriate boundaries and age-appropriate communication with children. When she finally lifted the lid and peered inside with the excited anticipation of a child who believed she was about to discover something wonderful, her immediate reaction told me that my instincts had been correct, and that my parents had crossed a line that would change everything about our family dynamics and force me to make decisions I had been hoping to avoid for years to come. Inside the ornate wooden box that had clearly been chosen for its formal, ceremonial appearance rather than its appropriateness as a container for a child's birthday gift, were dozens of old photographs that looked like they belonged in a historical archive rather than a present for an 8-year-old. Faded letters written in spidery handwriting that spoke of tragedy and loss, official documents with government seals that documented immigration and death, newspaper clippings yellowed with age that chronicled events from decades past, and personal items like jewelry and small mementos that clearly belonged to someone who had been important enough to preserve these memories, but whose existence had never been mentioned in Mia's presence or explained as part of our family history. The photographs showed a young woman who looked remarkably similar to Mia, with the same dark hair and bright eyes and infectious smile that made the resemblance immediately obvious and unsettling, but who was dressed in clothing from decades earlier and posed in settings that looked like they belonged in a historical museum rather than a family photo album that might be shared with living relatives. The letters were written in a foreign language that I recognized as Polish, though I couldn't read the content that appeared to be deeply personal correspondence filled with emotion and urgency, and they were addressed to someone with a name that I vaguely remembered hearing whispered among family members when I was very young, but that had never been explained or discussed openly in family conversations that I was allowed to hear or participate in as a child. The documents appeared to be immigration papers, death certificates, and other official records that told the story of someone's journey to America and their eventual fate that had apparently been tragic enough to warrant the kind of secrecy and silence that had surrounded this person's memory for decades, while the newspaper clippings were obituaries and news articles that seemed to chronicle events that had affected our family long before I was born, but that had apparently shaped our family. History in ways that no one had ever bothered to explain to me or help me understand as part of my own heritage and identity. The jewelry included a delicate gold necklace with a pendant that featured symbols I didn't recognize, but that appeared to have religious or cultural significance. Earrings that looked like they had been handmade by someone with considerable skill and artistic ability, and a wedding ring that was obviously old and worn, but that had been carefully preserved as if it held great sentimental value for someone who was no longer alive to wear it, but whose memory was important enough to maintain. Through these physical artifacts, as I looked more closely at the contents of the box with growing alarm and understanding, I began to piece together fragments of a story that I had never heard, but that explained some of the mystery and tension that had always surrounded certain topics in my family's conversations and gatherings, the way certain subjects would cause uncomfortable silences or abrupt changes in discussion that suggested there were secrets being kept and histories being hidden from younger generations who might ask uncomfortable questions. The young woman in the photographs appeared to be my grandmother's sister, someone who had immigrated to America in the 1940s during or after World War II, but whose fate had apparently been tragic enough that the family had decided to never speak of her again or acknowledge her existence to subsequent generations who might want to know about relatives they had never met, but who had been part of their family history. The documents suggested that she had died young, and under circumstances that were either too painful or too shameful for the family to discuss openly with children or grandchildren, who might not understand the complexities of wartime immigration, family separation, and the kinds of tragedies that had affected many families during that turbulent period in history. The personal items indicated that she had been loved and mourned by someone who had carefully preserved her memory, even if they couldn't bear to talk about her life and death with other family members who might ask questions about what had happened to her and why her story had been erased from the family narrative that was shared with new generations. But what made this discovery so disturbing and inappropriate for Mia to see was not just the tragic nature of the story that was beginning to emerge from these artifacts, but the way my parents had chosen to reveal it without any preparation, explanation, or consideration for how an 8-year-old child might react to suddenly learning about a relative who had died under mysterious and apparently tragic circumstances decades before she was born. There was no note explaining who this woman was, why her story mattered to our family, or how it connected to Mia's own family history and identity, just a collection of artifacts from a tragic life that had been hidden from our family for decades and was now being dumped on a child who had no context for understanding what she was seeing or why her grandparents thought this was an appropriate birthday gift for someone her age who was expecting something fun and celebratory rather than dark and disturbing. As I realized the full implications of what my parents had done to my daughter on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her year, I felt a rage building inside me that was unlike anything I had experienced before as a mother, trying to protect her child from unnecessary trauma and confusion that could have lasting effects on her emotional development and sense of security in the world. They had taken a moment of joy and celebration and turned it into something dark and disturbing, forcing Mia to confront family secrets and tragic history that she was far too young to understand or process in any healthy way that wouldn't leave her with questions and fears that could persist for years. The fact that they had chosen her birthday to reveal this information, packaging it as a gift when it was clearly meant to be some kind of lesson or revelation that served their own purposes rather than Mia's emotional well-being and healthy development, showed a level of selfishness and poor judgment that I found completely unforgivable as a mother who had dedicated her life to protecting her daughter from exactly this kind of inappropriate adult behavior. Mia was still staring at the contents of the box with wide, frightened eyes, her young mind trying to make sense of what she was seeing and why her grandparents would send her something so confusing and scary as a birthday present when she had been expecting something fun and age-appropriate that would make her feel loved and special on her special day that was supposed to be about celebrating her life and the joy she brought to the people who cared about her. "Mommy," she said in a small voice that broke my heart into pieces, "who is this lady? Why does she look like me? Why are there sad papers in my birthday present? Did someone die? Are these pictures of someone who's dead?" Her questions revealed exactly how inappropriate this gift was, and how much my parents had failed to consider the impact their revelation would have on a child who deserved protection from adult complexities and family traumas that she was too young to understand or cope with, effectively without professional help and careful guidance. I immediately closed the box and took it away from Mia with the kind of decisive action that comes from maternal instinct and protective fury, telling her that there had been a mistake, and that this package wasn't actually meant for her, but had been sent to us by accident, a lie that I told without hesitation to protect her from having to process information that could wait until she was much older and better equipped to handle family history that was complex and potentially disturbing. I suggested that we put the box away and focus on the wonderful gifts she had received from her friends who understood what appropriate presents looked like and who cared about making her birthday special, rather than using it as an opportunity to dump family trauma on an unsuspecting child, trying to redirect her attention back to the positive aspects of her birthday celebration and away from the confusion and fear that my parents' inappropriate gift had created in what should have been a purely joyful day. But even as I tried to minimize the impact of what had happened and restore some of the joy that had been stolen from Mia's birthday by my parents' inexcusable lack of judgment, I knew that this incident had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and that I would need to have serious conversations with my parents about boundaries, appropriate communication with children, and their complete lack of consideration for Mia's emotional well-being and developmental needs. The fact that they had chosen to reveal family secrets in such a dramatic and inappropriate way, without any preparation or explanation that would help a child understand what she was seeing, showed that they were either completely oblivious to child development and appropriate communication with young people, or that they had deliberately chosen to traumatize Mia for reasons that served their own psychological needs rather than her best interests as their granddaughter who deserved their protection rather than their selfishness. The phone call I made to my parents that evening was one of the most difficult and emotionally charged conversations I had ever had with them, as I tried to understand what they had been thinking when they decided to send a box of family artifacts and tragic history to an 8-year-old child as a birthday gift without any context, explanation, or consideration for how such a revelation might affect her emotional state and sense of security. My mother's response was defensive and dismissive, claiming that she thought Mia was old enough to know about her family history, and that learning about relatives who had died long before she was born was part of growing up and understanding where she came from, as if traumatic family secrets were appropriate topics for childhood education, rather than sensitive information that should be shared gradually and with careful attention to developmental readiness. When I pointed out that sending disturbing historical documents and photographs of dead relatives as a birthday gift was completely inappropriate and had frightened Mia rather than educating her about family history in any constructive way, my mother accused me of being overprotective and sheltering Mia from realities that she would eventually need to understand as part of her family heritage and identity, as if exposing a child to trauma was somehow beneficial for her character development, rather than potentially damaging to her emotional well-being. Today, Mia is a confident 11-year-old who understands that her worth isn't determined by family members who demonstrate poor judgment, and that she has a mother who will always prioritize her emotional safety over maintaining relationships with people who put their own needs ahead of her well-being and healthy development. Was I wrong to limit my parents' access to Mia after they sent her traumatic family artifacts as a birthday gift? Should I have tried to help them understand appropriate boundaries rather than restricting their contact with their granddaughter? Would you have made the same choice if your parents sent your young child disturbing family secrets packaged as a birthday present? Sometimes protecting your child's emotional well-being requires setting boundaries that family members won't understand or accept, but that are necessary to ensure your child feels safe and protected from experiences that prioritize adult needs over childhood development and emotional security.